The absolute illusion of absolute protection has officially shattered within the ancient, rain-slicked walls of the British monarchy, leaving the entire palace apparatus scrambling to contain a constitutional earthquake that no one saw coming. For years, an unwritten rule seemed to dictate the silent operations behind the velvet curtains of the institution, a silent understanding that certain individuals, by virtue of their proximity to the ultimate seat of affection, were simply beyond the reach of ordinary administrative scrutiny. But that assumption collapsed entirely on a stormy evening at the Duchy of Cornwall, proving that when the strict lines of constitutional law and sovereign inheritance are crossed, even the most deeply entrenched figures of borrowed influence can be systematically dismantled in a matter of minutes. The story does not merely center on a failed high society gathering or an uninvited guest being ushered away from a private property. Rather, it exposes a profound structural shift in how power is guarded, inherited, and exercised by the next generation of the royal family. To fully grasp the magnitude of what unfolded, one must understand precise geographic and legal setting of the confrontation. The Duchy of Cornwall is not just a collection of scenic country estates. It is a massive, sovereign financial and territorial trust established in the 14th century, designed explicitly to sustain the heir to the British throne. It belongs exclusively to the Prince of Wales, holding a unique constitutional status that places its management entirely outside the jurisdiction of the reigning monarch's spouse. Yet, taking advantage of a carefully timed window when King Charles and Queen Camilla were out of the country on a highly publicized state visit to the United States, Tom Parker Bowles walked onto this historic territory. He did not arrive merely to appreciate the heritage. He arrived with an entire corporate production crew, heavy commercial catering equipment, and a network of wealthy private investors. In an act of staggering defiance, he threw open the doors of Grand Estate Hall to host a lavish, unauthorized corporate gala, effectively operating as if the land, the title, and the historic prestige were his own personal property to commodify. To compound the audacity, his team had mounted a custom crest on the wall that bore a deceptive, striking resemblance to the official royal crest, a visual trick designed to assure his wealthy clients that their presence enjoyed the highest form of palace sanction. For a long time, this pattern of behavior had been quietly tolerated on a much smaller scale. Across the years, complaints from dedicated estate wardens and palace staff members regarding unauthorized access and the commercialization of royal backdrops had been systematically neutralized. Whenever a formal report reached the high desk of the palace administration, it mysteriously vanished into bureaucratic silence, and those who dared to question the arrangement often found their careers abruptly cut short. The message was clear to the internal staff. Challenging the son meant challenging the mother, and challenging the mother meant inviting an immediate storm of royal displeasure from the very top of the institution. This created a shield of perceived invincibility, encouraging bolder transgressions as time went on. Corporate sponsors were reportedly approached with promises of exclusive access. Private dinners were hosted under the radar, and significant financial transactions changed hands, all built on a lucrative illusion that access to the monarchy could be bought through private connections. However, the landscape changed completely the moment the king's aircraft left British airspace. While the eyes of the global media were fixed on the state visit, and subsequently on the massive crowds at the Chelsea Flower Show in London, where public figures like David Beckham drew every available camera lens, the quiet countryside became the stage for a calculated counter-move. Prince William's office had received a comprehensive, undeniable report detailing the ongoing breach at the duchy. But William, fully aware of the delicate nature of his ongoing structural discussions with the king regarding the modernization of the crown properties, chose a strategy of absolute institutional precision. Instead of staging a dramatic, personal intervention that the tabloids would paint as a bitter family feud, William legally invoked a powerful constitutional mechanism. He formally transferred his full administrative authority over the specific estate to his uncle, Prince Edward, granting him the absolute legal right to act as the sovereign custodian of the territory without delay. Edward, an individual who had spent decades observing the strict discipline of institutional boundaries, accepted the mandate with absolute seriousness. He understood that this was not a petty personal grievance. It was a fundamental defense of the integrity of sovereign trust against commercial exploitation. When Prince Edward arrived at the estate hall, the torrential rain outside mirrored the sudden, freezing drop in temperature inside the room. The gala was in full swing. with Tom Parker Bowles confidently moving through a crowd of high-profile investors, holding a glass of wine, entirely secure in the belief that his mother's title rendered him untouchable. But the operational execution had already begun long before Edward even stepped into the main hall. Under a precise, quiet directive, his state security teams had entered the commercial kitchens, disconnecting the unauthorized high-voltage catering equipment from the sovereign power supply, logging the equipment serial numbers, and instructing confused staff to halt all operations immediately. The sudden logistical paralysis in the wings of the building sent an immediate shockwave to the front of the house. As Tom turned and spotted Prince Edward standing perfectly still near the entrance, he chose to double down on his defiance rather than retreat, stepping forward with a loud, performative grin designed to project authority to his guests. Tom openly declared that the event was running under the direct, personal sanction of the Queen of England, loudly warning Edward that he had no legal right to disrupt the proceedings. The response from Prince Edward was an absolute, devastating silence that weighed heavily on the entire room. Edward's reputation for strict adherence to protocol had often been dismissed by outsiders as old-fashioned, but in this critical moment, that exact discipline became his greatest weapon. He allowed Tom to unleash a torrent of bitter, defensive rhetoric. Witnesses in the room watched in stunned silence as Tom, realizing his authority was slipping away, launched into an incredibly personal attack, calling the prince a mere errand boy in an expensive coat, an institutional ghost whose title carried no real weight in the modern commercial world. He went so far as to proclaim to the gathered investors that old titles were entirely obsolete, and that modern figures with real-world connections and corporate influence represented the true future of the institution's relevance. Edward did not flinch, nor did he interrupt the display. He stood like an immovable pillar of the state, letting the hostile words echo off the historic walls until the tirade finally exhausted itself. When the prince finally spoke, his voice remained completely calm, measured, and terrifyingly clear. He did not engage in a shouting match. Instead, he laid out the unyielding reality of constitutional law. He informed Tom, and everyone within earshot, that the land they stood upon belonged exclusively to the Prince of Wales under a strict constitutional trust. He made it unequivocally clear that the title of Queen Consort carried absolutely zero legal weight, zero administrative authority, and zero jurisdiction over sovereign territorial properties. The illusion of royal backing evaporated instantly. Edward then issued a formal final ultimatum. The entire building was to be completely evacuated, all unauthorized equipment dismantled, and every single guest removed within exactly 60 minutes. He concluded with a chilling legal warning that anyone remaining on the premises after the hour elapsed would be immediately arrested by the sovereign wardens for criminal trespass on crown land. The execution was immediate, turning the lavish corporate gala into a scene of chaotic, silent retreat as the lights dimmed. The deceptive crest was forcibly stripped from the wall, and the reality of absolute institutional authority settled over the ruined event. Barakat Adalabab tu Sekri Utu, Melanjuk Narasi Dari Bab 1 Dengen Focus Menelam Pada Konfrontasi Telepon Dengen, Radikamilla, Reaksi Para Ilit London di Dalam Wangan. Serta Ankaman Dan Jeritan Frustrasai Tom Parker Bowles, Satdai Keluarkan Dari Property. Format Tetap Consistent. Desajikan Tampa Jita Waktu Timestamp. Tampa Sabajan. Dan Digitalist Dalam Dua Baisa. Inggris Lal Indonesia, Berturat Turat Dengan Target Panjang Mendekati 8.000 character. B. Narasi voiceover, BAB2, Panjang Mendekati 8.000 character, version 1, English voiceover. The ticking of the 60-minute ultimatum transformed the Grand Estate Hall into a high-stakes arena of absolute panic, stripping away the carefully manufactured veneer of corporate sophistication that had filled the room just moments before. As the reality of Prince Edward's legal declaration settled over the distinguished crowd, the atmosphere shifted from an exclusive social gathering to a chaotic scene of logistical scramble and social retreat. Wealthy high society investors and corporate sponsors, who only an hour earlier were clinking glasses and celebrating their proximity to what they believed was official royal influence, now stood completely frozen, calculatedly assessing the immense reputational damage of being caught in a highly publicized territorial dispute. Waiters dropped their trays, and technical technicians frantically uncoiled massive power lines in near-total darkness, while the heavy rain outside continued to lash against the grand windows amplifying the internal isolation of the ruined event. Yet, in the middle of this logistical collapse, Tom Parker Bowles refused to accept the definitive end of his long-standing institutional immunity. His face turned a deep, furious crimson as he stood amidst the physical deconstruction of his commercial operation. Refusing to succumb to the quiet authority of the sovereign wardens who were slowly closing in on him, he grabbed his personal assistant violently by the arm, whispering a series of sharp, desperate commands. Within less than 2 minutes, a high-security encrypted call bypassed the standard palace switchboards and connected directly to the private quarters of Queen Camilla across the Atlantic. The call was placed on a speaker system within immediate earshot of Prince Edward and several prominent London elites who had delayed their departure just to witness the final outcome. The voice that boomed to the receiver was not that of a detached constitutional figure, but a mother operating under absolute, unbridled fury. Camilla completely bypassed any formal greeting, launching into an immediate, sharp command for Prince Edward to stand down his operations at once. She declared with absolute certainty that she would not tolerate her son being subjected to a public, humiliating removal, promising to take the entire matter directly to King Charles upon their return to resolve it privately within the family structure. She made it explicitly clear that this aggressive, heavy-handed legal intervention was completely unauthorized, highly destructive, and entirely unwelcome. What happened next became the precise moment the carefully constructed illusion of Camilla's administrative power collapsed in front of a room full of powerful witnesses. As the Queen Consort continued to speak, laying out her threats of royal intervention and personal retaliation, Prince Edward did something that no senior official or family member had dared to do for over a decade. He calmly reached out, took the mobile device directly from his aide's trembling hand, and ended the call mid-sentence. The mechanical click of the disconnected line echoed through the hall like a literal thunderclap. Every jaw in the room dropped in absolute, unmitigated shock. The witnesses had just watched the Queen of England get systematically cut off in the middle of a direct command, and the sudden silence that followed was heavy with the realization that the old rules of absolute protection no longer applied on sovereign ground. Tom Parker Bowles stood frozen in the ruins of his own event, his eyes wide as he realized that no rescue expedition was coming from the United States, and that he was entirely exposed to the full, unyielding weight of constitutional law. Realizing that his borrowed shield had been completely shattered, Tom's composure disintegrated into pure, uncontrolled rage. As the robust estate warden stepped forward to physically steer him toward the reinforced exit doors, he did not go quietly. Instead, he began to scream a series of highly volatile, explosive accusations that shocked even the most hardened palace observers in the room. He turned his rage toward the monarch himself, shouting that Charles had never truly been a real king, but rather a tragic man who had spent 40 years waiting in a dark corridor only to spend his actual reign being quietly managed and controlled by his own eldest son. His voice cracked with fury as he openly labeled Prince William as a deeply controlling, paranoid, and suspicious individual, a man so thoroughly consumed by the obsession protecting his future throne that he was actively tearing his own blood apart over a minor property dispute. He spat his words at Prince Edward, calling him a hollow, hired hand who was incapable of fighting his own battles, loaned out like a piece of corporate equipment to do the dirty work of a coward who couldn't even bother to show up in person. The tirade did not stop at political insults. It quickly escalated into direct, dangerous blackmail threats that shook the very foundations of institutional privacy. Tom screamed that he had spent years sitting in private rooms where conversations occurred that were never meant to be recorded or heard by the public. He claimed to possess devastating information about the king, about Prince Harry, whom he loudly mocked as the foolish, runaway son who abandoned his heritage for nothing, and about Prince William. He even went so far as to launch a highly personal attack against Catherine, the Princess of Wales, calling her deeply pretentious directly in front of the remaining high-profile witnesses. He explicitly threatened that he held more than enough compromising material to completely rip the royal family open in front of the global media, warning that if this was the institutional war they wanted, they had better be absolutely certain they could afford the devastating public cost. His voice continued to echo down the long corridor, a stream of desperate, furious threats, until the heavy exterior warden doors were finally slammed shut behind him, cutting his voice off from the estate entirely. Behind those closed doors, the silence that returned to the hall was deafening, and it revealed a profound truth about the nature of transient influence. Not a single guest in that massive room made a single move to help him. Not when the powerful London elites who had happily consumed his expensive food, drank his imported wine, and utilized his prestigious name to secure their commercial access, took even a step toward the door to defend him. Some of them looked genuinely stunned, entirely unable to comprehend what it possessed a 50-year-old man to stand on sovereign ground and systematically attack the entire royal family by name in front of legal witnesses. They realized immediately that Tom's explosive outburst had not saved his event. It had merely provided the legal authorities with an undeniable record of institutional hostility. The socialites and corporate directors quietly gathered their coats, passing through security checkpoints without uttering a single word, leaving the grand hall completely empty, save for the estate wardens and the cold, unyielding presence of Prince Edward, who stood silently watching the final clearing of the territory. The aftermath of the expulsion exposed the deep systemic damage Tom Parker Bowles left behind. Prince William had already initiated a comprehensive financial and structural audit of the Duchy of Cornwall. The results were devastating. The estate had suffered hundreds of thousands of pounds in lost revenue due to Tom's unauthorized commercial exploitation. Furthermore, production teams had breached centuries-old heritage structures and compromised top-tier state security protocols just to grant unchecked access to private investors. Every single repair bill and security failure was compiled directly onto William's desk, turning a private family dispute into an undeniable case of corporate trespass and financial bleeding. Following the initial clash, Queen Camilla attempted a second, desperate call to Prince Edward. However, the tone of absolute command had vanished from her voice. Realizing that William's authority over the duchy was legally ironclad and constitutionally supreme, her threats turned into emotional pleas. She begged Edward to drop the formal charges to save her son from a permanent criminal record, stripping away her royal persona until she was nothing more than a desperate mother. Edward listened just enough to register her defeat, then ended the call mid-sentence. The powerful London elites in the room witnessed the exact moment the illusion of Camilla's absolute power dissolved. With the audit secured, Prince William drew a compromise-free constitutional line, leaving both Tom and Camilla completely exposed to the full, unyielding consequences of the law.